Upcombe Ward.
I'm Councillor Lucy Williams, Upcombe Brown Ward.
Councillor Colette Thomas, Truelox and Hentless Ward.
Good morning, I'm Councillor Jane Watkins. I'm Fairwater.
Morning, I'm Co-opted Member Vicky Horler.
Good morning, I'm Jonathan Keown, Assistant Director at the EAS.
Good morning, I'm Karen Scott Woodhouse. I'm the Principal School Improvement Partner with the EAS, specifically for Tovine Local Authority.
Board about Andy Rothwell, Assistant Head of Education in Tovine.
Good morning, everybody. Andrew Powell, Deputy Director for Education.
Thank you very much, everybody. And Gerard is in the corner doing all the hard work. So, welcome. May I welcome members and officers to the hybrid meeting of the Education Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Just to remind members, this meeting is able to be viewed live by members of the public and press today. Therefore, may I welcome anyone that may be watching remotely. A recording of this meeting will be made available on the Council's YouTube channel after the meeting is concluded, should anyone else also wish to view it. Just to confirm, as a Council, we welcome the use of the Welsh language within our public meetings, but I can confirm that I had not received any notification requests to use Welsh today. Therefore, this meeting will be conducted in English only. As a reminder, may I remind members to refrain from using the chat facility and instead use the raised hand icon to indicate when they want to speak. Please could you also keep your microphones muted when not talking so that there aren't any interruptions encountered. Thank you, members. Moving on to the agenda, could Geraint, our Democratic Services Officer, confirm if we have received any apologies?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we've got apologies from Councillor Chris too, and we've got apologies, hopefully just for the first half of the meeting, from Councillor Alfie Best. He is hoping to join us about halfway through, he said. Thanks.
Thank you. And I'd like to welcome Jason O'Brien to the meeting. We've just done a round of introductions, Jason.
Thank you, Councillor.
There we go. Agenda item 2 is the declarations of interest. Could I ask members in alphabetical order to state whether they have any declarations of interest to declare? Councillor Coles.
Governor at Blynavan Heritage VC Primary School and Governor of Aberystwyth Comprehensive School, Chair.
Councillor Janet Jones.
Councillor of Blynavan Heritage School, Governor.
Councillor Price. I don't have anything to declare. Councillor Thomas.
Chair, I'm a Governor at Nantcelyn School. I'm also a Governor at Cumbraen High IUB, and I have a grandson that attends Cumbraen High School.
Councillor Watkins.
I'm a Governor at Our Lady of the Angels Primary School.
Councillor Williams.
I'm a Governor at Woodlands Primary School and Pontywood Primary School.
Victoria Horler.
I'm a Parent Governor at Yscol Panteg.
Takes us to agenda item 3, which is the minutes of the meeting held on the 2nd of February 2023. Just to remind members, these minutes relate to the report we received on the ALN strategy and the post-inspection action plan ESTIN recommendation 4. Please, could I ask members to confirm that the minutes are accurate, account of the meeting, and if anyone is against or wishes to abstain, please can you confirm now? Any comments? No, they confirm. Thank you very much. Takes us to agenda item 4, which is the action sheet. Chair, can I remind members, Leanne Skellett sent out outstanding information arising from the action sheet to members within her email on the 9th of March. Any other comments on the action sheet? Could members please confirm that they have had the questions and that they are happy to note the action sheet? Thank you. They're confirmed. Takes us to agenda item 5, which is the School Improvement ESTIN Recommendation 1. The purpose of this report is to consider progress on the actions undertaken as set out within the Post-Inspection Action Plan, also known as the PIAP. Eston's recommendation 1, school improvement, and provide members with a range of information about Torfaen schools and set out the progress that is being made. May I welcome officers from the local authority and the EAS to the meeting, who've already introduced themselves, and can I ask officers if they would provide members with a brief overview of the main points within the report. Can we keep it to about 10 minutes, please? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So this is looking at recommendation 1, which was to improve outcomes for learners, particularly in secondary schools. Before I start, I just want to point out that all of us around the table are new this year. So I started in August, Andy started in October. Karen has been new to Torfaen since September. And John, I think you started about 2 months ago.
Officially in January.
2 months, yes. So there's a significant amount of change that's happened this year. Despite that change, we have actually made progress with them. So the majority of the actions linked to recommendation 1. So in the report, there's an overview of the RAG rating against individual actions. Plus, we also wanted to give a bit of a baseline of where the school's performance is across the board and some of the systems and processes that we operate jointly between the EAS as our school improvement partner and the core local authority staff. So that's looking at how the school improvement partners work, the school development plan or SDP professional discussions that we have with individual schools, and then some of the tailored support that we have to those schools that need higher levels of support. So that's detailed within there. We also really wanted to celebrate some of the good practice that's within Torfaen, so you've put some case studies in there that have been identified through we call it our CSSR process, so it's Celebrate, Share, Support, Refine. So that's facilitated as a joint project between local authority, EAS and schools, and it's about capturing what's working well in the school, what could be better as a joint piece of work, so we understand our schools better and they're getting the bespoke support that they need for their individual priorities. Within the report, there are details on schools that are not on track with their school development plan priorities. There are 5 schools in there that discussed are not on track. I just want to point out at this point that that's not necessarily a bad thing with the school. It could be because there's been a senior leader absence. It could be that there's a target that's been set to run across the whole of the year, but they didn't intend to start it perhaps from January or later within the academic year. There are also cases where they're not on track because there's a need for additional support. Perhaps they haven't run their self-evaluation processes as we would have liked them to. So I just want to flag that up right from the start, that there's contextual data behind everything in here. Because this is a public meeting, we don't want to talk about individual schools, we want to talk about holistic approaches. And I think that's probably sets the context as best as possible. We'd really welcome your questions.
Thank you. Any other comments from any other officers before we start the questioning? Lovely. So we'll go straight into our questions. Can I just welcome Stephen Vickers, the Chief Exec? I see you're online. So
yeah, thank you. Thank you, Chair. Thank you for allowing me to join you today. I'm just observing, but obviously here to answer any questions should you need, but thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you. So we're going to the questions, and the first question is in the key messages, and it comes from me, which is, within the key messages section of the report, you state that you are brokering bespoke support for schools via the EAS. What types of support does this entail? And is the local authority confident that this is a correct amount or type of support being provided to the appropriate schools who need it?
If I give some illustrations, bespoke support, then I'd invite Karen and John to come in because they'll talk in more detail. So a key part of our work each year is to carry out a school development plan professional discussion with schools. In that conversation, we look at what processes schools ran for evaluation, what the conclusions they've come to, and then how they've devised their priorities for the year. So that's the initial piece of work that establishes, do we agree with where schools are, of what their priorities are they running appropriate systems? There are school improvement partners that have ongoing work with school who have a deeper understanding and an ongoing conversation with heads and with other members of staff within the school that act as the initial part of quality assurance. Out of that meeting comes the bespoke support. So it could be, for example, that they want to develop Welsh second language. So perhaps a member of the Welsh team within EAS would go in to provide support on that. It could be about literacy, it could be about numeracy. If it's about a more whole-scale change, if they need high levels of support, then it could be the brokerage of what we call a learning network school. That's where we pair up schools that have particularly strong practice to work alongside maybe one of ours that needs to develop that particular piece of practice. That is tracked through ongoing work with Karen, with the school improvement partners, and for those schools that are having LNS, Learning Network Support School, ad support, we also have a team around the school meetings at least each term that just keep a check-in on, is the progress being made, is it the right support at that time? So that's a joint meeting that's had with the Chair of Governors, with the head teacher, maybe other senior leaders in the room, plus senior staff from the local authority and the EAS. And what we want to make sure is that there's that regular ongoing dialogue. If it's not right, we'll change it. So I am confident it's the right support because those conversations are going on. Historically, there have been schools that haven't made the right amount of progress. We know some schools have been too slow to progress. And for those schools, we have changed the support this year. There's been a change of school providing LNS support, plus there's been a change of focus. So at this point, absolutely, we're satisfied with the support that's going in because we've got the right tracking processes in place. But I just welcome Karen to perhaps give a few more examples and talk about some of the quality assurance that she runs.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Chair. A lot of our support, as Andrew said, comes through the Learning Network schools, and we try very hard to match our Learning Network school partners to the schools so that they can offer that particular level of support that school needs, and we constantly monitor and evaluate whether those partnerships are working effectively or not, and where they're not working, we will look to have those discussions with the local authority about how better we can help them and support those schools. But it's not necessarily just about the Learning Network schools. We will look and tailor support to schools as and when they require it. So one example of that is as schools are approaching their ESTIN visits, we will very often put in a little bit of extra help and support there. So we might send a team in to do a little bit of supported self-evaluation to help that school better understand where it is and better prepare, really, I suppose, those conversations and staff for ESTIN. Where necessary as well, we'll put in things to support effective school development planning. So where we can perhaps see that it's not as evaluative and not as strategic as it should be, then again, myself and the school improvement partner will work with those schools to ensure actually that they are on that right trajectory to make the progress and to be able to evaluate it effectively. Just some examples for you, Chair.
Supplementary questions from anyone? Can I just ask, do you give the same support to governors, because the EAS obviously has the governor training in there, and the ESTIN support when schools are expecting an ESTIN review?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we do. So again, there is a very bespoke package of support for governors, and there are lots of different programmes that are accessible. Most of those now are recorded as well, so governors can access them when they want to.
Jason, you need to come in. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just to add to that, obviously, it's important that we've got the right mechanisms in place for the schools to understand their position and go through that, their own self-evaluation, so that they are able to pitch themselves as to where they are in terms of that need for support, so that we're all singing from the same hymn sheet there. So that self-evaluation, for some schools, I think it needs to develop. But I think what's important, I think has come over from both what Andrew and Karen has said there, is that ability in terms of the bespoke packages of support, that they can flex up and down depending upon any particular needs a school may have and how those needs may change, but also depend upon, as Karen has pointed out, if there's an ESTIN inspection or there are any external factors. So again, that support flexes up and down depending upon that continuation of assessed need of the respective school.
Thank you, Jason. That helps. Vicky, you've got the next question. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. So I have a two-part question. So the first part is, how will the local authority and EAS ensure that there are effective infrastructures in place within schools, which will further drive improvement and ensure the self-evaluation takes place on a regular basis? And the follow-on is, how will we ensure that judgments from the school self-evaluations are consistent across all schools?
Thank you, Councillor. We have quite robust systems, I would say, for monitoring and tracking. And one of the things that we are doing now is to ensure that every school has quite rigorous supported self-evaluation activity every term. So that will be school leaders, the school improvement partner, and sometimes it will be myself as well, because we like to have that QA process. That will be aligned to the school's monitoring and evaluation system, and it could include a variety of activities. But that way we are understanding the school a little bit more, understanding perhaps why the school has developed the priorities that they have, but also then it gives us an understanding of how well they use the analysis of their self-evaluation to drive school improvement forward. If we think perhaps that those self-evaluation activities are not working the way that they can, that's again where we might put in a little bit of extra support. And there we will encourage schools perhaps to take up things like the CSSR, the teaching and learning review, if you like, so that we can get a better understanding of pupil progress and how well pupils progress over time. The second part of that question, how do we ensure that judgments are valid? We do an awful lot, I suppose, of QA through our professional discussions with the school. The school improvement partner knows its school very well, and I have at least termly, if not half-termly, discussions with those school improvement partners to make sure that they feel that the school is on track, and if it isn't on track, or they feel that perhaps self-evaluation isn't as robust as it can be, then more often than not, we will have those additional discussions with the school, and we may then broker additional support for them.
And there have been times where we've identified that school improvement partner isn't working as we would like them to be. So Karen has provided additional line management support, mentoring, and in some cases we've had to step school improvement partners down where they weren't right. So it is a really robust mechanism we've got in place. That there are a significant number of school improvement partners, so it's a challenge to monitor it. And that's one of the ongoing pieces of work we've got with ES, is about what that model might look like in the future to make it a more concise quality assurance model. But that's in active discussion at the moment.
I think that's where we were trying to get to with our questions. Do you want to answer?
Yeah, just to go back to the second part, which how are we ensuring that the self-evaluations are consistent across schools? So is there a template that the schools use, that all using the same template for their self-evaluations?
Thank you. Yes, there are. There's a format that we call our supported self-evaluation format, which we are constantly looking at and constantly evaluating to make sure that it's giving us the information. In addition to that, we are always providing update training for our school improvement partners so that they are better able to use evaluative language and qualitative statements to be able to actually have that consistency of approach. So when they are writing a supported self-evaluation, we know that the language that they're using is consistent.
Just to build on that point as well, that we provide a lot of professional learning around self-evaluation for schools as well. So the School Improvement Branch will work with the Teaching and Leadership Branch to make sure that schools have a good understanding and a good grasp of what effective self-evaluation looks like. So that process is embedded within schools, and we draw alongside schools then to triangulate that process to make sure that what they're saying is the judgment of teaching at that moment in time. We're quality issue in that moment as well. So that professional learning to make sure that that's well understood every day is really effective as well.
We have a number of questions, and sometimes we duplicate our question and you may well have answered. So if we do, just say that we've already previously answered. Councillor Collette-Thomas.
Thank you, Chair. On 4.1, it notes that 15 professional discussions took place during the autumn term. Can you tell us how many more professional discussions have taken place since Pontia in November 22?
I can't give you the precise number now, but by the end of this term, at least 2/3 of the schools, so there would have been at least 20 completed, and all will be completed by the end of this academic year. So part of the SDP discussion is just one aspect of it. Where there is we want a bit of a follow-up, we will have a team around the school. So, for example, all secondary schools are having to own a team around the schools. So we want to check the progress, the ongoing progress against their school development plans. It's not just a one-off hit. So at the moment, we're diarying at least one SDP professional discussion for every school. All secondary schools are having at least a termly team around the school. Those schools in special measures have a half-termly multi-agency meeting that involves Estyn and Welsh Government, as well as local authority EAS. Plus there are other just bespoke meetings that pop up if there's an issue. So there's a whole mechanism of graduated response depending on the need of the school. But to go back to your answer, all schools will have their SDP discussion and are on track to have it by the end of this year. And at least 2/3 of all Torvine schools will have had it by the end of this term.
To date, how many, can you tell us how many have been?
No, because I'd have to go through my diary, but there is at least 20 that would have had it by the end of this term. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't want to sit and go through my diary at this point. Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Janet Jones, question 4.
Thank you, Chair. How are schools encouraged to learn and follow other schools that are demonstrating practice worth sharing, as per examples provided in 4.2 of the report? And the second point is, can you advise us what the Agile Leadership Toolkit is about, please?
Thank you, Councillor. So we hold events across the region, not just within Torvine, of a practice worth sharing, where we'll invite schools to come forward to share that. And we're currently talking about how that will look from September 23 onwards to make that more accessible for schools to come forward. We also share it through our networks of school improvement as well. So quite often the PSIP network will meet and we'll talk about practice worth sharing that will be shared across other schools across the region. On top of that, we also have systems in place where schools can come forward if they think that they want us to go in and look at things and share those out. So all of that happens, and that happens across many teams across the EAS. The Agile Leadership Programme is a programme that we've brought in across the region, and we're currently on tranche 3 of training, and you've done it, haven't you? So maybe you can talk about that a bit more. Because I'm currently on tranche 3, so I've done one session, I apologise.
Thank you. Yeah, Simon Breakspear is the author of Agile Leadership, and it really is just a set of tools, really, a toolkit to allow schools to be, again, more strategic and more streamlined in their thinking. So, for example, when we're doing school development planning, there will be formats like a Clarify Canvas, where you're asking really pertinent questions about why have we chosen this priority? Is it relevant to what we want to do at the moment? How are we going to implement it, and what do we expect the impact to be? Alongside then, you've got what Simon calls lean monitoring, and monitoring in the moment. So rather than leaving your monitoring of school development priorities until the end of each term, it's using sort of rapid action plans to say, are we on track? Is it having the impact that we think that it should have had? If we're not on track, why are we not on track? So it allows schools to be constantly questioning themselves as they're going along, and to capture key impact, I suppose, statements that allow them to be more evaluative.
Andy's just done some calculations. That
was quick.
21 have been done since September. Yeah, and we have an additional, I think, 3 in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, including one tomorrow.
Yeah. Thank you.
Question 5. Councillor Thomas.
Thank you. In 4.3, you mentioned most schools are on track towards meeting their priorities. 5 schools were reported not on track at the end of the autumn term 22. How does the EAS provide the local authority with information on schools identified as not being on track in meeting their progress? And part 2, how is the progress being monitored by the local authority to ensure the pace of progress within these schools is appropriate and are on track?
I'll start on the first part, and Karen will come in if there's anything I miss. So we, through the School Improvement Partnership Network, that's how we monitor whether schools are on track or not, and that's a discussion with the head teacher on a termly basis set against the school development priorities. As Andrew said at the start, sometimes those priorities are larger than just a term, and they might take the course of the full academic year, and in some cases, schools may not start on one priority until the spring or the summer term, depending on what they're trying to achieve on that one. In addition, as Andrew said at the start, where schools are not on track in this report, there are circumstances around staff absence or various different factors that have contributed to that. How we share that with the local authority, we have monthly partnership meetings between the EAS and the local authority, and that's where we've discussed these schools. And we've discussed the schools that are not on track, and I think more importantly, what we're going to do to support those schools where they're not on track, and maybe whether a valid reason doesn't exist. So in those situations, that's then looking about the amount of support that we put in. So if I can draw back to the first question of this session, we talked about that bespoke support, and we've got 3 levels of support that exist within our model. We've got the universal, which obviously everybody gets. We've got a targeted support, and we've got an intensive support. And that's where we will look then as to where that school needs to be in that model. So that's the flex that Jason was speaking about. That's the flex that we've got to move between those levels. And it could be putting in some targeted support just to help the school along with a specific target, a job of work, for want of a better term, to help them to get to that point. All of that is communicated in partnership meetings and outside of partnership meetings. We talk often and regular. And we're all on the same page there, that the schools are getting that universal message.
So to give some specific examples, there's one school that wasn't on track because they had significant staff absence over the autumn term. There was a broken leg, there was a maternity leave, there was a bereavement. So this was things that were nothing to do with the leadership of the school. It was just circumstance. So as a result of that, we brought forward the STP professional discussion. We made sure that happened early in the autumn. We're having follow-up team around school meetings. We've recently had it with the school. Between that, we also brokered mentoring support for the new chair of governors. The chair was saying this is a very complex situation that she hadn't had to manage before. So we paired her up with a more experienced chair who'd been through similar circumstances to help her manage it. We also seconded a deputy head from another school to provide additional capacity on a daily basis to the school. And the most recently team around the school, it was a much better picture there. The staffing capacity was almost back to full capacity. And the school was making appropriate progress against the school development plan. But there was that period of a challenge within the school. There was another school that wasn't on track in the autumn. As a result of that, we asked the school to take part in a deeper dive review. That was a joint review between the local authority, EAS, and the school. Out of that, we had concerns about the quality of self-evaluation, some of the development work going on in the school. So we're now taking additional steps. This school is now part of a half-termly check-in process, as well as having had a change of school improvement partner, and also additional support that's been put in from some of Andy's teams, some of the head of ALN inclusion teams. So there's that, as John's saying, there's that monthly check-in, plus there's that regular flex of support to make sure they're providing the right support, but also there's the clear accountability that it's up to the school leadership to manage this. And if, after appropriate support, they're not making the right progress, we need to consider next steps.
Thank you. That takes us to question 6, which is Vicky again. She's been demoted to councillor. She's our governor rep. And thanks.
Thank
you. And Jason, did you want to come in on that question? Sorry.
Yeah, apologies, Chair. I put my hand up quite late then. In relation to the latter part of that previous question around the local authority and how the local authority, I guess, sort of satisfies itself, there's a number of mechanisms we've got in place, but more latterly, within the local authority, we have what's called a strategic improvement board and an accelerated improvement group as well. Now, the strategic improvement board consists of external consultants, a chief exec from another local authority area, and external consultants with an expertise in education who provide that extra layer of external scrutiny on the local authority as well. That board meets on a termly basis, so there's that extra layer of scrutiny that they're totally independent of the local authority as well. So hopefully that'll give members some additional reassurance.
Thank you, Jason. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So my question is in relation to bullet point 4.6, and the conclusion statement is that the longitudinal aspects of judging impact of actions will be evaluated and reported from summer 2023. So my question is, who is responsible for evaluating the impact of the actions taken? And then the second part is, how will we ensure that leaders at all levels are positive, enthusiastic and committed to driving forward school improvement, as referenced in 4.6?
So every term we will provide local authority with a quite detailed and comprehensive report, which is based around the supported self-evaluations and the work of the SIPs in school. It's also based around the partnership meetings that we have, the catch-ups. There's a whole host of things that go into it. And what we try and do in those termly reports is to give a very specific overview about what we think has been the impact of supported self-evaluation and what the quality of teaching and learning looks like. And moving forward, we're going to try and refine that a little bit more, because when you think about something like the quality of teaching and learning, it is so very big and very vast that sometimes our findings are not as forensic as we would like them to be. So moving forward, if we're talking about teaching and learning, for example, we would want to know which element of teaching and learning are we really going to hone in on and focus, and have slightly different nuances each term, so that we get a much better overview of quality of challenge, for example, quality of questioning, quality of marking and feedback, pupil independence. So we're really drilling it down to forensic aspects of teaching and learning, and that should give the local authority, we think, a much clearer picture of teaching and learning overall.
ES are also preparing a impact report, which due to receive tomorrow, looking at particularly on secondary schools and the impact of support over the last few years. So again, there's a number of tools, mechanisms that are coming through. Some of them can't be shared publicly because they talk about individual schools, but those that give the holistic picture would be shared with members. I believe you had one of those reports recently. The report that you've had recently is the report that Kat's referencing, where we're going to refine the aspects of teaching and learning that we're going to look at this term onwards. So we can start to track the impact and progress. Up to now, it's been gathering a bit of a baseline of provision, and now we need to track what difference we're making.
Any supplementary questions? I have one on a matter of trust. I think our schools lost a lot of trust, or didn't have that trust in the first place. Are we getting better results, and are we being trusted more, both with the EAS and the local authority within our schools?
Thanks, Councillor. It's a really interesting question. I think trust and relationships are kind of the core of the the cornerstone of any school improvement work. And we've worked in that domain for a long time, and the way you make best progress with schools and quick progress with schools is developing that trust and relationship. I think that's probably been, since we've all come into post, one of the key elements that we wanted to really drive forward. We want to be visible, we want to be in schools, we want to be amongst the children in schools. You know, we don't talk enough about children. We want to be with the children in schools to understand what their needs are and how we can best meet those. We want to develop relationships with schools which are based on trust, because through that we're able to put the right support in quickly. We don't have to go through a period of trying to get under the skin of things. If we've got trust there, we can enact support very, very quickly. I know, Karen, as well, you've been very, very busy in terms of being visible in schools and you know, just being at the end of the call, at the end of the phone, if somebody needs to speak to you, you're there. And I think that goes a long way in developing that professional trust and relationship.
Strategy groups.
Yeah, so as part of that, we've developed quite a few different strategies. Well, we're in the process of developing quite a few strategies at the moment within the local authority. And as part of that, we've developed lots of groups which have involved not only local authority officers and colleagues from Welsh Government and EAS, but also, really importantly, schools, because they've got to be part of the process of developing strategies. So we did a great piece of work around attendance, where we had representatives from across all sectors of schools in Torfaen to help develop the new attendance process and strategy there. We've got a similar piece of work going on at the moment around the development of a digital education strategy in Torfaen, which is, again, it's about bringing schools in to be part of that process to develop the elements of trust and build relationships and confidence in one another to be able to move things forward in schools. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, so there has been a much increased visibility and contact of LA officers with schools. That's been absolutely deliberate. And so relationships have improved. What we now have to do is deliver on the actions. So it's about, as Andy said, it's about a joint development of policy and of process, but also just delivering. It's been relationships based now. What I'm really pleased with is getting many more phone calls from heads where they're perhaps having a struggle with an issue. I've had 2 this morning that have had issues within their school, and they're just phoning and saying, I just need to offload at the minute. You don't need to do anything. I just need to talk to somebody because I need a safe space to go. And that in itself, I think, speaks volumes for me that they're willing to do that. They're willing to open up that there's an issue they're struggling with. The message we consistently say to the schools is, we are here to make it work for you. We're here to make it work for the learners in the school. And that's the message that we're constantly reinforcing through officers. We're not here for a paperwork exercise. We're about making a difference to that individual child. And that is cutting through. But we just need to be consistent and deliver on our actions now.
Jason, you need to come in.
Yes, just to say, I mean, that obviously that visibility and that relationship is crucial to building up that level of trust and building up that effective working relationship. What I've seen since being in role is the management team within education really, exactly as Andrew and Andy have described there, really putting themselves at the front there, meeting schools regularly, you know, having that open dialogue, having that significant level of visibility. But that's also transferred right throughout the local authority. Where, you know, from a corporate perspective, there's that level of ownership, accountability and service as well that's being provided to schools across all directorates. You'll see from, or you may be aware that, you know, in following the Eston inspection, Chief Executive took quite a lead on the improvement plan from the Eston inspection, and within other schools have seen that level of visibility from the senior management team within education, through to myself as strategic director, and through to the chief executive as well. So there's a real relationship that's being built up and has been built up right across the local authority, you know, at all levels, which I think really pays a positive message.
Yes, John.
Thank you. I agree with everything that's been said, and from our perspective, it's all about relationships. We're dealing with people, not paperwork. I think that's really, really important. And, you know, not so long ago, I was a head teacher myself, and that's a tough job. So we put that message into the system that we want our head teachers to be open and honest with us. You know, and we may have something planned, and something might get in the way to stop that happening on a certain day. We're having those conversations now, and head teachers are being open with that. Our model is about knowing schools well, and our model is working alongside our schools and not a done-to model. You know, I think that's a game changer, that ability to go in and say, I'm your equal in this partnership, and we're going to do this together and work together. And we've got our own strategy groups as well, and our last head teacher strategy group meeting, where Torfaen head teachers sit on as well, told us that they like the peer-to-peer model, so the fact that lots of our SIPs are existing head teachers, so they understand the pressures and the nuances around that role. And also that they really appreciated the visibility of the EAS staff as well, that we were out there in schools working alongside and quite quick to react to needs when they phoned up for what they needed as well. So a good example is that Estin call. You get the call on the Monday, and by the Tuesday we've mobilised the team to go and support schools. So I think that two-way relationship is working really effectively at this moment.
Thank you for that. That's really good to hear. So, the next question is from Lucy. Councillor Janet Jones, number 7.
Thanks, Chair. Most schools would benefit from engaging in the approach to enable a greater focus on improving the forensic elements of teaching, as in paragraph 4.7. How can we encourage more schools to take up the Celebrate, Share, Support, Refine, CSSR approach, if you're saying that more schools would benefit from it? And secondly, the LA will identify schools to undertake the CSSR teaching activity. What will be the criteria for identification into this process?
Thank you, Councillor. The CSSR process is a relatively new one, and as it stands, it's a voluntary process. So we are encouraging and asking schools to take part in it, so that they can see the value of it. But at the moment, it is a school-based decision. However, more and more schools are coming forward. The more that we are doing, the more I think the message is getting out there that actually it is a really helpful and supportive process where the work is done alongside senior leaders in school, and it just helps them to have that external viewpoint of where they are in their, in their school development planning and their school improvement and the impact that they're having. So I think we've started slowly to try, again, it's building up those relationships with schools. You know, I don't think any of us wanted to go in with a very heavy-handed approach. You know, we need schools to trust us. And I'll give you an example. I had a lovely phone call this morning from one of your schools saying, our self-evaluation activity is on this date. Would you come and work with us? We'd like your viewpoint. So we are building up those relationships, and the more that we're doing that, the more schools are actively coming forward to say, we'd really like you to join us for this. So that's been really, really pleasing. I'm sure Andrew will talk a little bit more, but where we have already identified concerns in a school, then we are targeting those schools for the CSSR process. So far, I think the report mentions that 3 did it voluntarily in the summer term. Since then, we have now undertaken another 4 already in the autumn term, another 3 this term, and we have another, I think, 5 booked for the summer term. So as we're going through the process, schools are feeding back on the benefits of it. We try and make it an agenda item on the head teachers' meetings as well, so that those who've been through the process can share their experiences. And as we're moving forward, it is becoming a more positive experience.
This is an interesting piece of work at the minute in the context of strikes and action short of strike. So we're having to manage quite a tricky balance with schools of trying to get them to engage with work that they're not statutorily forced to engage with. We want this to be a positive and constructive process. I think I'll leave it there.
You mentioned that it's a relatively new process. How new?
been about a year, I think, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, last year was a pilot process, so it's new. Piloted last year and then rolled out this year. And as with everything, you know, we're constantly looking at it and taking the good points and adapting them based on our findings of what we're doing. When I say findings, I mean the process, not findings of individual schools. And what schools are telling us as well. And if I may, just to build on the points here, you know, this is about relationships again, isn't it? It draws back to that last question. Because this is a head teacher saying, I'm comfortable with you coming in and actually having a little bit of a deeper dive on what's going on in my school. And you can only get to that point when you've got relationships. And I think what we've done alongside schools is we've agreed that, you know, if schools have a CSSR, it replaces that termly self-evaluation then. So we're not doubling down, you know, and we're not adding to the workload and the burden of those schools. We're being sensitive to that workload. And I think just to pick up on Andrew's last point there, you know, it's really important for us that the CSSR process is not just seen as a mechanism that's done in schools that are causing us concern. It should be seen as a mechanism that's used to celebrate and support the very good things that's going on in your schools as well. So having more of those head teachers coming forward to say, yes, come and see, tell me what's going well in my school and give me 1 or 2 ways forward, that's really empowering as well. And spreading that message widely and freely from the head teacher groups, because they're the ones who can motivate and galvanise their peers, that's having tremendous impact.
Lucy.
Thank you very much. This question actually builds on the previous question, very much so, and you've partially answered it. I think this is about for us to try and understand the processes a little bit more. So we have the CSSR programme, which we've just been talking about, which we understand, and that's extended of the self-evaluation activity. So it's a bit about understanding how those two processes develop. And a slight question I ask, is there ever any danger of duplication when sort of marrying these two processes together? Maybe just to explain a little bit more about how they complement each other.
Thank you, Councillor. So, yeah, there are two processes that exist within our model to get to know our schools well. One is a termly self-supported evaluation. Yeah. So I talk about that one in the first instance. Yes. That's where we'll go along to a school. The school will identify when they were planning to do a self-evaluation activity. We come along, we draw alongside, we complete that self-evaluation activity with the school at that moment. There are some negotiations with the head teacher there, you know, because what we want to see is a variety of different self-supported evaluation activities. So if I've got a SIP who's constantly doing a learning walk on 3 occasions throughout the year, I question why. Why are we not looking at books? Right. Why are we not talking to learners? And that's got to be a carefully crafted conversation because it's a process that's, as I said earlier on, done alongside. The CSSR, as you quite rightly said, that's a little bit more of an extended supported self-evaluation. So often that will take a larger team. So we'll send in a slightly larger team. We may send 3, 4, 5. And that just wouldn't come from the School Improvement Network. That would come from curriculum partners and partners from the teaching and learning aspect as well. The school would still have ownership on deciding the focus of a CSSR. Again, there's a negotiation there, but the school sets the direction of travel. And then we'll go in and we will cover more ground in a day because we've got more people. So to pick up your second point then, to avoid that kind of workload balance, which I think we have to be sensitive to within the system, we would never double down. So we wouldn't say, in the first half of this term, we're going to come and do an SSE, and in the second half, we're going to come and do a CSSR. There have been occasions where we've completed a CSSR, and we haven't quite got to the point we wanted to get to at the end of the day. And again, in a negotiation with the head teacher, we've gone back to schools to complete a smaller activity just to complement that piece of work and to give the school something that's going to be useful for them. If they've committed a day of working alongside us, they need something at the end that's going to be useful to allow them to know their school better and to drive that school forward. So again, it's that relationship, you know, and having that open, honest, trust-based relationship to say, we're not quite there. Let's do a little bit more. Does that answer your question?
That's really helpful. Thank you very much.
Supplementary. The next question is from me, and it's relating to 4.7 in the report, involving governors in self-evaluation processes. How is the local authority supporting and ensuring governing bodies are able to carry out effective leadership within their schools? And do we have adequately appointed governing bodies across all our schools, with members having appropriate skills, knowledge, training to support them in developing effective self-evaluation processes?
I'll take the second part first, if I may. So the skills knowledge is essential, isn't it? And one of my colleagues, Ed Price, the Assistant Director who looks after governance, has a comprehensive catalogue of professional learning that's available for governing bodies, and that's been developed over time into a pathway. So his pathway now takes in a newly appointed governor, but also looks at experienced governors as well. And he's currently exploring ways that we can utilise those experienced governors to support newly appointed governors or schools where governing bodies are not quite as effective. In terms of the collection of the self-evaluation, if that's where you want me to go, again, that's a negotiation with schools. So we're not adverse to governing bodies joining any process, as long as the school is comfortable with that and the head teacher wants that to be part of what they're doing. Do you want to add to it?
Just to add in as well, Chair, one of the key activities that a school improvement partner has to undertake now is to ensure that they attend at least one governing body meeting and deliver the agreed support plan from the EAS. So whether that be universal or intensive or bespoke, we would expect the SIP to go to the meeting to talk through the process to help governors to understand those different levels of support, and then to help governors understand why that particular support level has gone into their school and what it's going to look like. So that now is part and parcel of the SIP work programme.
Okay, I think this is a really interesting question, and it's prompted me as something we need to do differently. I think it's not something we specifically ask in the SDP professional discussions or the team around the school meetings. So that's something we'll do from now on. It's just part of those meetings. Let's drill down how much are governors involved in self-evaluation. So thank you. Plus, I know Andy wants to.
Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, I've only got a couple of bits to add to that, really. The Welsh Government's Evaluation Improvement and Accountability documentation that was published last year, the back end of last year, that places a much greater emphasis on school governing bodies to be the accountable arm of the school, fundamentally. We've got an absolute right to make sure that school governing bodies are well trained and supported, and I know that colleagues from EAS do a cracking job of that in terms of what they offer. Running alongside that, concurrently to that, the local authority also offer training opportunities for all governing bodies linked to various areas, with, for example, attendance. There is support out there and training sessions available for governors to attend around attendance. I think also, and it's just good to highlight this, the Torvine Association of School Governors, that hasn't run for nigh on 5 years, really. We've re-established that. We held a meeting, our first meeting of that, just recently, which was really well attended, and it was great that we had senior council officials and officers attending and talking, as well as colleagues from EAS who came along to speak to that. And I'm also pleased to announce that we've managed to recruit, or elect, I think probably is a better way of describing it, a new chair and vice chair for TASC. So going forward, they're going to be looking at redefining the purpose of what TASC is there to do, defining or redefining the constitution, and then hopefully hosting termly meetings for all Torvine governors to be part of. Really positive stuff.
Can I ask what the chair is?
Yeah, so the chair is Peter Scott. Comes from... yeah. Okay. Thank you.
My point on asking that question is actually very often self-evaluation reports put on an agenda and it's brought to the governors and say, we need to pass this. And, you know, my point when I was previously in a position, was we want to be part of this, and whether that is happening at the moment, that governors are involved in putting the self-evaluation together and actually agreeing it at governing bodies rather than it doing to them or doing it with them. So thanks, yeah. Takes us to question 10, which is Councillor Jane Watkins.
Thank you. Paragraph 4.8 says, share a clear vision for the strategic and academic development of the school, and this is effectively communicated to all shareholders, to all stakeholders. How do we encourage schools to engage with the wider community, with pupils and parents as part of their self-evaluation process, to install a culture of collective responsibility? And also, the PIAP and actions set out in the report and the appendices are very local authority and EAS and school leadership focused. How are we ensuring that the learner is at the heart of our actions and what role they can play in the school improvement journey? We found that there's only one reference to learners in the whole of the recommendations 1 section of the PIAP, improved outcome for learners.
Thank you, Councillor. That was quite a long question. I might have to ask you to go back and revisit. So I suppose for us, the learner absolutely is at the heart of everything that we do. And when we visit schools, I would say one of the key joys is that learner voice in all schools that I have visited in Torfaen is the driver for how the school moves forward and how it improves. So you have various mechanisms for learner voice within each school, and they have a key role to play in how and what leadership does to make their school a better place. So for me, within schools, pupil voice probably is one of the most vital aspects of any supported self-evaluation. And when you speak to learners, where it is really effective, they absolutely know what they want and what will help them to learn, how their learning environment should look, how their classrooms should look, what they want to see from the school. So I would say in Torfaen, from my experience so far, learner voice and how they drive learning in their school is a strength.
Can I just check with you? Obviously, that's very good. Is there a mechanism then to go back and check? So if they say, for instance, we learn better if our classroom looks like this, that somebody then checks maybe the next term or at some point to go, and now their classrooms do look like that. So it's worked. And we have listened to them, not just paid lip service and said, here's your opportunity to speak to us. Thank you very much. Box ticked, and we don't follow it through.
Absolutely. Again, most pupil groups learn voice, and schools do it very, very differently, believe me, but they meet very, very regularly. In the best cases, they manage their own agendas, lead their own agendas, lead their own meetings, have quite clear and succinct action plans of what they want to do, and they go back and they visit them. Most of them will have access to senior leaders, and they will hold them to account if things aren't done. And you can see from their minutes, from talking to them, you can see very clearly the changes that they have made and the impact they have had. They are very good at talking about the changes and the impact in schools in Torfaen.
I agree with everything Karen said there, and just thinking of a time when I was a head teacher, if I ever sat down with a pupil group, they'd always ask for a swimming pool. And my school was in central Cardiff, which was impossible. It was full of concrete. So I think there's always got to be that trust in the local leadership of that school to make the decisions that are right, because children will come forward with a variety of different things that sometimes are either not possible or not appropriate. For us, it's about, when we do self-evaluation, we encourage our SIPs and schools to complete work scrutinies with children and their books. And it's having those conversations then centred around the learning and whether the child's having an influence upon their learning. So things like, what's the level of independence looking like at school X, for example? Are children over-directed, or do they have that chance to take ownership of their learning? Is there autonomy in the way that they present their work, in the way that they research their work, in the way that they find out how to do their work? The children have ownership of the topic, context, drivers. You know, is it still the teacher who's determining what they're going to learn at that set time? And we draw all of that out with children. Never lie, do they? You sit down with them with their books and they'll tell you everything. So we draw all of that information out, and for me that's equally as important as everything else we've spoken about, because that's how they learn. So all of that activity takes place, and then we will monitor that through our revisits during the following terms, and when we're looking at the professional discussions and other aspects that we have to monitor our school's performance.
Yeah, I'm just going to come in quickly and talk perhaps about something that I think you're sort of teasing around community engagement in particular. A community raises a child. You know, it's not the responsibility of a school or a family. It is the entire community that raises a child. And to that end, you know, we're seeing an increasing amount of community engagement from schools reaching out into the community. A lot of schools investing in big box void to encourage the ease of access to food for parents who might be finding it difficult to get hold of food. We see schools now with family engagement officers, and they're active in reaching out into the community, knocking on doors, building relationships with parents. We see schools who are offering reading programs for parents, so that, you know, but some of those barriers that exist between supporting learning at home, let's try and break those down as well. That's really, really important. So that's some of the sort of community stuff. There's sharing of documentation and policy for parents to access, and schools often, well, all schools lay on great events for parents throughout the course of the year. We see our secondary colleagues with big shows that they run throughout the year. They're report opportunities where parents can come and talk to schools about pupil progress. That's really good, but there's also a missing link here, I think, which is perhaps work that we could do we talk about this within the education leadership team quite often. How can we get pupil voice influencing what we're doing in here?
Absolutely.
And there's a huge piece of work, I think, to look at how we impact that, how that genuinely changes our policy thinking within a local authority and the drive there. So I think when we talk at community sort of engagement with schools, we look at it very much at a school level, but I think we're missing a trick if we don't think about how we can do it from a local authority point of view, taking the voice of pupils as well.
I totally agree, and I think, you know, the school is usually right bang in the middle of a community, and, you know, most homes within that community actually go sometime in their life in and out of the school, and unless we utilise that, and I think Jane was trying to get to, how do we encourage schools to become, they're quite insular when they've got a job to do, and the pupils arrive and they take on the work of the school, but how do we encourage them to look outside of that school and to be part of a community? I think that was my main gist and Jane's main gist of asking the question.
I mean, just on that, Councillor, I think that's a really, really good point. I think one of the great enablers for that potentially could be Curriculum for Wales. We talk about what Curriculum for Wales means for schools and for pupils. More importantly, it's about the knowledge, skills and experiences, and, you know, we often lose sight of the experience element because we get so caught up with knowledge and skills. So how can schools enact and enable experiences for pupils, and can they draw on the local community again to be part of that experience? We often talk about what a global citizen is. You know, a pupil in Blaenavon, from a global citizen point of view, that starts in Blaenavon. You can't understand or become a global citizen unless you understand your own context first. That's the absolute heart of it all.
I found during my years of work that aspiration was a big thing within my community of South West Cwmbran, and actually raising parental aspiration is a huge job in itself. And unless you get the parental aspiration there for their child, you've half lost the child in the first instance. So, you know, how would we get those schools to work with the community to build that aspiration for parents and other family members? That's the question again. Sorry, I'm taking...
Just when you were saying sort of missing a trick with engaging in schools, I think one resource, I think, which is worth exploring is the fact that quite a few borough councillors are also governors. And we know our wards very well. And I'm currently engaged with a sort of a community activity within our ward. I think there's more potential for that because we can act as links between the families, the schools, the local authority and different priorities. So I think, just to say, that's a positive relationship that can be built upon.
Any other supplementary on that? Thanks. So that takes us to question 9. Oh no, we've done that one. Turn over roads. Apologies. This is question 11, Councillor Thomas.
On paragraph 4.8, we say, team around schools meeting states that all secondary schools are participating in at least termly teams around school or multi-agency meetings this academic year. Do we have any primary schools participating, please, and how many?
Yes, there is one primary school engaged in termly team around school meetings at the moment. They're in receipt of Learning Network's school support, and we are monitoring another one that may also go into termly monitoring.
Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Takes us to question 12. Alfie, you're online, Councillor Beth.
Thank you, Chair. Just looking at the bottom of 4.10 and curriculum for Wales cluster working, it mentions sharing work between the clusters on these tasks they're going to do. What is the goal of sharing this work if they're all doing different tasks between the clusters?
Thank you, Councillor. The point and purpose of this cluster working is that clusters actually determine their own priority and their own direction. It will all be linked, obviously, to Curriculum for Wales, and in nearly all cases, it's usually centred around how we get that shared understanding at cluster level of learner progression, but the ways in which clusters approach it is very, very different. And that's absolutely right, and that's absolutely as it should be, because each school is individual and unique. But what we're aiming for is at least some common approaches or some common strategies, so that when they transition from primary into secondary, we don't have such variance in either how we're tracking and monitoring learner progress, and then how that translates into how the secondary schools use it. So you can see there, they mostly are looking at plotting progression for learners, either using learner profiles or using learner pathways, or research on progression and assessment, or assessment for learning techniques. But each cluster will have identified a very particular aspect that they want to focus on, and that's the direction that they will take.
Sorry, just to come in. So is the idea that each cluster individually has their own sort of vision that they're going to undertake, and then by sharing that in the summer term, other clusters can learn from that and take on board similar things? Is that the idea?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. I'll pick up on that point. Yeah, that's it in a nutshell. So it's a little bit like the child in Blaenavon that Andy spoke about. We're starting in the localised area and then sharing that good practice beyond. So it's important that each cluster has a curriculum that represents that cluster, particularly when they're feeding into a secondary school. So every child that goes to the secondary schools had a similar diet. So they're starting on an equal keel in year 7. But underpinning all of this curriculum work is some key principles. So good teaching and learning, good pedagogy is good pedagogy, and it's good teaching and learning. So it's about developing it in your local context to meet your needs, but then sharing those underpinning skills on a wider basis, so we learn from each other.
Thank you. Cheers.
Thank you, Councillor Best. Also relating to 4.10, the table sets out in 4.10 gives several mentions to transition plans. How are we addressing the gaps in learner outcomes identified between primary and secondary?
So again, this draws back to self-evaluation, knowing our schools well, making sure that we understand where the strengths lie across the local authority and understanding where some of the challenges lie, and putting in timely and rapid interventions to make sure that we're tackling this problem at source so that children do transition with skills that are appropriate to their age and ability. This has become more of a challenge with the new curriculum for Wales. We don't have that end of key stage nationalised marker anymore, which has created opportunities and problems. So this is now where this cluster work is far more important, that every school that lives and exists within a cluster has that common approach to progression, so that when children move from primary to secondary, that the secondary school understands that a child coming from school A, that school A says is at standard X, and a child coming from school B that says is at standard Y, the secondary school understands that and puts in that suitable transition plan and suitable intervention. That's not to say we don't still have some baseline measures. So, you know, lots of schools are still performing reading tests, spelling tests, and using the Welsh Government diagnostic tests with their children as well to make sure that there's commonality. But the new curriculum provides this opportunity of progression being an individual journey and pathway for each child. And I think it's important that we celebrate that as well and make sure that, you know, just because a child hasn't got to that expected level, that child's actual attainment and achievement might be better than the child who did get to the expected level. So it's understanding our children better, and knowledge is the key, isn't it? And sharing that and celebrating those children, you know, and putting that intervention in to allow them to excel.
Sorry, Chair, I was just going to add to that, going back to the previous question, it's why the cluster working now is so vital, because all of these meetings are looking at learner progression and maybe just even having that common language. So, you know, if we're saying that this is a particularly good piece of independent work in this school, do we have the same expectations in all of those cluster schools? So again, it's about bringing pieces of work, it's about discussing learner progress, it's about maybe comparing and contrasting. How does that look in your school? How does that look in your school? And possibly just trying to get some common strategies, common approaches, common language that means actually you do have that transition, but you have that common understanding of this is what we mean when a learner is making this progress. This is how it's exemplified, and everybody has that same exemplar and same understanding. There's a long way to go because Curriculum for Wales is very new, and we had very established structures previously with the old curriculum. But what is fantastic is all Torfaen schools have engaged.
So assessment is the big topic amongst heads. They all feel quite anxious about developing their own models of assessment, because the framework's been taken away nationally. So as Karen said, this is about them trying to develop at least a cluster shared assessment framework. Andy and I were part of conversations in Welsh Medium Cluster the last couple of weeks, and they've been talking about how they teach numeracy and about the expected levels that they would want for children finishing primary and entering secondary, because they'd identified that there was a different expectation of those leaving and those arriving. So they're adjusting their curriculum and the way that they teach in order to have a more streamlined pathway for those learners. And that's just one example of the curriculum. It's going on across all aspects. It's new, and heads are finding this challenging, aren't they? Because no one wants to do anything that's considered wrong, but no one knows what's wrong at the moment. It's a bit of a developmental process. But that's the point of Curriculum for Wales.
But our children leaving primary have to access the curriculum in their secondary schools, don't they?
Yeah.
If they don't do that, it's playing catch-up and causing budget concerns for secondary schools, and it's just accelerating reading and everything else that goes on with it. Thanks. Question 14, Vicky. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So my question is regarding the Eston report, which states, recently introduced professional discussions with schools have supported the local authority to develop a clearer understanding of the strengths and areas of improvement in its schools. This work is at an early stage and it is too early to measure the impact of these approaches on improving the quality of leadership and teaching in Torfaen. So the question is, a year on, what are the methods you are using to measure the impact and how are you judging the progress being made?
Okay, so the challenge, it is a year since the inspection, but we've all been here since the autumn term. So these systems have been in place from the autumn term to go right back to the beginning. We've been baselining, and the next step is to look at impact. So we are clear now on what the needs are of the schools. We've put in what we think is appropriate support and challenge. Now it's about monitoring the impact, and that's partly what these supported self-evaluation activities and the CSSRs are doing. There are schools that we know that have higher levels of support, so we're really focusing on those as the tracking schools, as well as the generalised approaches through the supported self-evaluation. This is the difficulty, is we recognise we need to show impact, but these are new systems. We have amended the supported self-evaluation process that we ran in the autumn because we identified it was too generic. It was looking at too many aspects of teaching and learning. So we've refined it down to specific aspects for this term. Is it differentiation and...
This term is...
progress.
Sorry, this term it's progress of literacy, so progress of learners in literacy, but we have a very clear programme going through for next academic year as well. Each term a very, very clear and specific focus.
And the summer term, our supported self-evaluation is looking at progress in literacy this year. So we're starting to build in these specific sampling times to look at the impact. This is the challenge. We're trying to catch up. Okay.
Yeah, I understand you all kind of give your timeline of how long you've been in post, and it is not quite a year for yourself, so thank you very much.
Yeah, so I started in August. Yeah, so it's one term. Anne started halfway through the summer. Karen started in the autumn. Jonathan's this term. So it's very short amount of time.
Yeah. Can I say some of our questions relate to the Eston report, which relates to previous officers. So we're asking the question, but we need to know how far we've gone since then. So, Councillor Jane Watkins, the next question.
Thank you. In Appendix 1.2, it says engagement with schools should facilitate the early identification of schools that are declining and in need of support to prevent them becoming a school causing concern. Are we confident that we have appropriate mechanisms in place to identify schools at risk of becoming a school causing concern?
I think the systems are appropriate. There are a number of checks and balances that take place through LA staff involvement with school, looking at a number of measures that we monitor, linked to perhaps attendance, exclusions, financial management within schools, state of the building. We keep a regular track of that. Along the teaching and learning aspects, we take the regular feedback from the school improvement partners who are in regularly. There is a risk that a school would slip through the gaps. There may be something that doesn't get picked up. But I feel the systems are comprehensive and as comprehensive as they could be. Short of just being in a school every day, or all day, we've got quite a complex set of measures that we use now to monitor the progress of schools each half term. I see Andy's keen to come in.
Yeah, just a little bit more on that maybe. I suppose the philosophy there is leave no stone unturned, and it's about trying to make sure that we are looking at all of the component parts that make up the life of the school, from safeguarding, the most important element, absolutely, and child protection, all the way through in a non-hierarchical order, for that matter as well, and looking for those early signs of is something not quite right? Is there something that we can do quickly to support that and put it right? But also being honest with ourselves, but we don't want to bury our heads in the sand and pretend that everything's okay if it's not. We've got to be, and it goes back again to relationships, we've got to have those relationships with schools where they feel they can talk to us and tell us if something's not quite right, because we're there to support them and help them. And likewise, we've got to feel like we can talk to schools about, well, look, I know, you know, the skill of the improvement partners in being able to do this, talk around some difficult topics sometimes. You know, we've spotted something in the classroom that we're not really 100% sure is working for that school, or we've identified some variance in teaching across the school, or whatever it might be, to be able to have those conversations as well, because at the end of the day, it's all about meeting the needs of learners. And if we're not brave enough to have those conversations, if we don't have those relationships, and if we're not looking at the right things at the right time, that's when things will slip through the net. But like Andrew said, it's a much, I think, a much tighter system now. It's much more cohesive. There's a lot more communication and dialogue, and those are the kind of the big enabling things that allow us to work and support schools appropriately.
Just to build on that point as well, we are constantly looking at our systems to make sure that we're providing the best quality for the schools and importantly for the children in Torfaen. So as part of that process, Karen will meet on a regular basis, as she said earlier on, with the SIP team. Now, we're currently looking at the SIP team for September moving forward. There are 26 SIPs serving the schools within the Torfaen local authority. And one piece of work that we're currently looking at is, can we reduce the number of SIPs? In terms of people, we still need the same number overall, same schools, but can we reduce the number of people, which would increase the QA processes and that quality that's coming in, that will allow Karen to really zone in on a smaller team of people to make sure that it's meeting those needs of the schools. We're then looking at how we assign these SIPs. So we are anticipating there will be some changes come September. So it's about putting SIPs into schools that we know they've got expertise within that area of that school space at that time, or put in SIPs who maybe, we've got a couple of SIPs who do a little bit more for us, and putting those into our schools that are harder to reach, so we could be a bit more consistent and a bit more persistent with them to get in there. Now, beyond that, there's also other layers. So Karen will meet with myself on a regular basis, and we'll just talk about Torfaen schools. And that feeds into a wider EAS SLT team meeting there, where we'll come together and we'll talk about those schools at a very early stage. And that's where we then start to put in the wider team, so the curriculum partners, the teacher and learning partners. We'll target that support at that point, and we'll broker that in really, really quickly. So it's all about that knowledge, isn't it? Knowledge is power, and knowing our schools and knowing them really, really well.
Thank you. That's all very good to hear.
Thank you, Jane. I'm taking question 16. Would Councillor Caroline Price like to take question 17? I know you had to leave early yesterday, so if you take question 17. And Councillor Cowles, would you take question 20 for me, please?
Yes, of course, Chair.
Thank you. I'll take question 16, which is, again, referring to the Estin report. They identify that overall, local authority officers do not consistently challenge the information provided or explore the support provided within the team around the school panels. How are we ensuring this effective challenge takes place now, and what impact has the new staffing structure within the education service and wider leadership had on communication and challenge within the service? I don't know whether you can answer that one, because
I think we've touched quite a lot of that, because the systems that we're talking about weren't in place previously, and so there is a much more comprehensive network of data sharing, plus tracking, going back to like the termly reviews of SDP progress, the quality of teaching and learning that's identified through supported self-evaluation, or the CSSR processes. There's partnership meetings which take place every month, which there is challenge in those meetings from both sides. Sounds a bit Trumpian, excuse me, but it is about us holding each other to account about what we promised we would deliver, and all of that is documented, and so I feel it is an effective process we've got in place, and it maps that in other local authorities which have had successful Eston inspection.
Maybe just to add to that as well, I mean, Jason mentioned earlier about the Accelerated Improvement Group and the Strategic Improvement Board as well, and their function and role as part of the, I suppose, challenge and support of the support that schools are getting from EAS, as well as the challenge and support towards local authority officers from members of that board as well.
Councillor Caroline Price, can you take question 17, please? Jason, did you want to come in?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I was just going to add, in terms of that I guess that layer of scrutiny right across the local authority, within the senior leadership team, within the council, the actions and the improvements being made, and any challenges within education reported there as well, through analysis of any of the performance measures that we've identified within the service areas or within the school areas. So there's that extra layer again of, I think, scrutiny is the key word here, is that extra layer of scrutiny as well from the senior leadership team within the authority.
Caroline, are you there? I don't know whether she's having trouble. Shall I take the question then? Question 17 is, how do we challenge and hold the EAS to account on support being provided to our schools? And is this sufficiently robust process?
Okay, so there's a number of aspects here. You've got the Joint Executive Group, which is all the executive members and directors meet with senior officers from the EAS on, I think it's a half-termly basis. So that looks at a wide range of impact measures and about developmental work within the EAS. So that's on a regional basis. There's also the company board. Then for Torfaen specifically, we have a monthly partnership meetings where this is an opportunity to talk holistically about schools and about the support that's being provided, about the impact it's having so far. We've already talked about the Accelerated Improvement Group and the Strategic Improvement Board. Again, there's accountability there in terms of impact reports and delivery of the EAS business plan. So it's a holistic network of support that's there, and challenge. Sorry.
Jason?
It goes without saying here, Chair, but crucial, obviously, is the relationship. Again, we've touched upon relationships between the local authority and schools, and it is the strength of relationship between the local authority and the EAS as well. And we've certainly built upon that within recent months. And, having that strength of relationship, so there's transparency, there's that ability to have open challenge both ways as well. And, we're able to have that continued open, transparent dialogue, and I certainly think that's developed in recent months.
That's good to hear. Thank you, Jason. Councillor Jane Watkins, question 18.
Thank you. Moving on to the post-inspection action plan. Appendix 1, the pace of action. How are you looking to increase the pace and development of the activities within the PIAP that require further development? What feedback have you received from Eston Link Inspector on the local authority's pace of improvement towards this recommendation? And 1.3.3, implementing an impact assessment model. Where are we with that? And why are the EAS green but the local authority are amber?
That's a lot of questions.
Yeah.
Okay. In terms of Eston feedback, so Eston signed off the PIAP in September. Most recent local authority link inspector visit was in February. We focused in that particularly on aspects of recommendation 4. But the general conversation was that they are satisfied with the level of pace of progress. They recognised that over the autumn term there was significant staffing vacancies within the education service, which did impact on progress. But they have raised no concerns, and they understand why some of these actions are slightly behind. Could you remind me of the other question?
Yes, sorry, certainly. So the first question was, how are you looking to increase pace and development of the activities within the PIAP that require further development?
So we're in the process of writing team plans and service plans. They've all been prepared. These are in, they are in there. They're action specifically for Andy and I. So those that aren't on track, actually, I think we're pretty satisfied they will be by the end of March. Having just a full staffing cohort is making an enormous difference. Okay. Is there anything you want to add?
No, I think.
Okay. So after that, there's the ST and sorry, what was the last part?
In 1.3.3, implementing an impact assessment model, where are we with that? And why are the AS green but we're amber?
Okay. So we're operating. We operate separate professional learning systems. So do you want to go first, and then we'll pick up why is the LA we're saying we're not as ahead as we would like to be.
Okay.
I think probably because the EAS systems and processes are well established and have been in place for a long time, and we are very familiar with the models that we use. So we are very confident that our assessment models, we are constantly evaluating, refining, updating, and they do meet the needs or meet our needs for what we use them for. I suppose the local authorities' processes are slightly newer than ours and therefore need a little bit of time to embed, but that's why there's that discrepancy from the EAS.
Karen's absolutely correct there, yeah. So, I mean, as Andrew alluded to, we were building capacity in the autumn term around staffing, whilst team plans and processes in terms of what are we going to be doing, I suppose, essentially, are in place. The thing that's really missing is, or we feel has been missing, is looking at how we know if we've made a difference as a local authority organisation. So what we've done, we started with a piece of work with actually our local authority link inspector, Alan, came and spoke to the extended leadership team around how to evaluate effectively and how you go through that process, which was really, really helpful. And actually he commented back that he really enjoyed the engagement with staff and took a lot away from it, was pleasantly pleased. The second part then, I suppose, in terms of what we're doing is we're establishing a model by which we can actually evaluate the professional learning and support that we offer to schools within the local authority. Looking at a couple of models there that have come from different parts of Wales and from international models actually around that. So we've got a staff training session on Monday where we're going to be presenting these models to staff and asking them to consider, okay, how can you use one of these models? What's going to be our preferred consistent model that we're going to take as a local authority? How are we going to use it? How are we going to link it to our team plans? How is it going to help us to know that we've made a difference? And that's the impact bit. That's the really bit, the important bit. So helping staff really, when they're doing training, to start thinking with the end in mind almost, rather than thinking about an activity that we can do. Start by thinking, what is the thing that we need to change? What is the thing that's going to make a difference to schools, and building our processes more around that. So hence why it's in an amber state. There's a lot of work going on, but there's more work to be done.
Yeah, so historically, professional learning, the evaluation has been X number of people attended, they liked it, they thought it was helpful. So we're trying to move beyond that as to, well, what difference did it make? How did it change your practice? How did it change practice within your team, within your schools? So that's the next step. And we are on the right lines, but it's at too early a stage to rate it green. We're happy with the progress, but it's not where we want it to be.
Thank you for that. Question 19, which is Councillor Alfie Best. Did you start on? Yes.
Thank you, Chair. Speaking more generally, since the implementation of the PIAP, excuse me, what barriers have you identified that might affect your progress towards addressing recommendation 1, improve outcomes for learners?
Okay, so staffing capacity has been a significant issue up until recently, but that's been addressed. over the last term, it's been difficult with industrial action that's been taking place within schools. That's limited the work that we've been able to complete. Even things like Snow Day last week, things like that knock it out. This has been a short term which has been disrupted by snow, a number of industrial actions, and the action short of strike is continuing at the moment, so it limits the ability for us to get into school and work alongside school-based colleagues. There are pieces of work that John's talked about in terms of realigning SIPs, which I think is a really positive step and will increase the pace of the work, increase the pace of progress. But actually, it's not a huge problem at the moment. I think that's just something that will accelerate progress. But I'd say it's the wider workforce context that's more of a challenge than anything else at the moment. I don't know if colleagues want to say anything.
I think you covered it off. I mean, the action short of strike action has stopped the inability to get in, and we respect the right of members to take industrial action. I think the new curriculum potentially has an ability to not slow progress down, but it's a change, isn't it? It's another change, and we've already spoken at length about the fact that some of those progression national measures are being taken out of things. So a new system always takes a little bit of time to embed. But as Andrew said, it's looking positive, and the engagement from schools across Torfaen is effective. Yeah.
Okay, Alfie.
Yes, thank you. Cheers.
Councillor Coles, will you take question 20, please?
Yes, Chair. Looking at Appendix 1 at paragraph 1.2, it states that the local authority has vigorous systems in place with its partners in the EAS to identify and address emerging issues in schools and can provide high quality and timely support, enabling schools to improve outcomes. But over several years, this committee has received assurances from education officers and representatives from the EAS that we know our schools, we know our learners, and that pupil tracking is working well. Yet that has not been the case in reality. And how can we be confident that our systems are vigorous and that we do know that our schools and we will see improved outcomes for our children as a result of that? Thank you.
Okay, well, I can't speak on what happened before. I hope you feel that there's a greater level of transparency, that there's a greater detail in the reporting coming to members. The additional groups, the Accelerated Improvement Group and the board, I know has representations from scrutiny. Within those meetings, we're able to talk in more detail as a not public meeting about some of the specific issues that we're dealing with. The systems are, since I've started, the systems are more comprehensive and they're more rigorous in terms of tracking in school. I feel very confident to say that. I think there is a significantly improved relationship between EAS and the local authority. It's truly joint working, and that will have an impact on all aspects of school improvement and working of the local authority.
Thank you, Councillor Coles. Welcome, Councillor Clark. I did invite Richard to attend. He's coming to the Civic later this morning, so I said feel free to come in, so welcome. Councillor Janet Jones, your questions number 21.
Thank you, Chair. My question is in relation to Appendix 1.3.1, implementation happening. However, there are recruitment challenges in specific areas. How are we working with teacher training providers? How is the quality of teacher training being monitored and evaluated? And are the skills to self-evaluate taught during teacher training sessions?
Yes, so the recruitment and retention of teachers is a national problem, not just one that's exclusive to Torfaen. I think it's important that we note that one. Where we are seeing issues across this region tends to be within Welsh medium and certain subjects within Welsh medium, and where a school maybe has a faith background as well. That's proving challenging in the more leadership positions that we're looking at. In terms of how we engage with ITE providers, myself and another assistant director sit on the strategic board at Cardiff Metropolitan University. So we have a voice in that area, and we feed in, you know, our strengths and concerns to that board, and they are really effective at listening. We've got many schools across the region that are lead network schools for Cardiff Metropolitan in particular. So they would lead on the professional development under a set framework of guidance, but they would lead on the professional development of teachers on training at their schools. Sorry, can I get the second part of the question, Councillor? Thank you. Apologies for that. Yes, they are. They're touched on by the training colleges, but I would say that's at a fairly low level, because when you're training to be a teacher, your first port of call is to be an effective teacher and get your classroom practice. So those self-evaluations would be very much based along assessment for learning, for example, reacting to the children that's in front of you and adapting your teaching to meet the needs of those children. So that does happen. Then I would say that when teachers are then established, that's where they would come on to the leadership pathway, which is a nationally agreed pathway that schools would identify aspiring leaders, and they would be put onto one of the appropriate professional learning networks, and it would build upon those early foundations then.
Commentary on that. So I think our question yesterday was around how qualified are our teachers coming out of into our schools. So that around that point, but are they qualified then to go on to management systems, or is it just a learning process within the school that they're in?
I think it would be inappropriate for me to comment on how qualified they are, because I don't have that information to hand. In terms of their journey, there's the ability to do the National Masters Programme after they've qualified as a teacher, which is another nationally endorsed programme. But their professional learning at that point would become the ownership of themselves and their school. And when somebody's a newly qualified teacher, they would have a mentor assigned to them. They would also have an external verifier who would work alongside that mentor to identify the strengths and to identify the early professional development opportunities that teacher needs. And that process then would grow under the school's own performance management system, where that individual would identify maybe a pathway that they see themselves growing into, and that school would then support them with the help of the local authority and the EAS.
I think my concern was that there was some concerns a while ago on our middle managers within schools and whether or not they were getting the right transition routes. So, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. There is quite a comprehensive professional learning programme for leaders in the EAS, and it is quite structured. It would be down to individual schools to determine when their staff were ready to go on to these different programmes, but certainly we would hope that all schools would take up the Middle Leadership National Programme, work through that, and then move those staff onto the Senior Leadership Programme, and then hopefully onto the Aspiring Head Teachers Programme. You know, we can't dictate or enforce what schools do, but certainly we actively promote it. There are really well-attended networks. They have lots of professional opportunities, and they are expected to undertake quite specific tasks and complete a leadership task at the end, which they then must present. So it is quite a rigorous and quite a detailed professional learning programme. It has lots of really good feedback and reviews. I was just going to go back, Chair, to the NQT. Again, I would say the EAS has quite a rigorous process for quality assuring NQTs. It's led and managed effectively by a team. And there is that requirement that all NQTs do pass their induction year. And I would say, again, if there are any issues and concerns, they are raised quite quickly with the EAS team for NQTs, and there is that extra support put in by the external mentors to ensure that, you know, they get the support that they need. Yep.
Yeah, so as part of the partnership meetings that we have each month, we review a termly report from the EAS, which is about engagement in the various professional learning programmes. We picked up in the autumn, wasn't it, there were certain sectors, there were certain schools which didn't seem to be engaging in certain prisons. So we've picked that up with schools. That's been part of their STP professional discussions, some of the team around schools. In some schools that's been illegitimate. There's just been a context where it's not been right for them at that time. In others it's been picked up that actually it was just something that slipped their mind and they need to refocus that in terms of succession within the organisation, within the sector. That's a termly check-in point that we have.
Sorry, just on all of that, I think it's really important, and we touched on it earlier as well, that all of this professional learning is freely available to schools as well. So there's no cost to schools. That's provided and that pathway is there. So we've removed that financial barrier that may exist to allow that kind of equal access to all of this professional learning.
Yeah, thank you very much. This question is probably comes out of actually concern for staff well-being. If we look at the amount of changes that schools are facing, and possibly include where a head teacher is also a school improvement partner. So what impact is this having on our head teachers spending time out of their schools is one question. There's also the fact that there's a number of initiatives that were set out in Appendix 2. There's programmes, networks, sabbaticals, pathways, working towards silver, gold awards, etc. Is there too much time being spent on achieving certain coloured awards and attending networking meetings rather than being in the classroom teaching? And is there the danger of too much pressure now on teachers with all these additional activities? And then how are we closely monitoring and evaluating each specific action or programme so that we can determine which ones should be continued or progressed, or whether alternatives should be considered, or it's no longer worth pursuing as it's not adding value? I can repeat any of those questions.
Okay, this is a really timely question. This is part of the industrial action that's taking place. It's about workload and impact on well-being of staff. It's a legitimate question. It's a really challenging time in that we've had ALN reform, there's curriculum reform, there's been managing and coming out of the pandemic, there are financial challenges nationally, there's a lot going on within schools and it's a challenge for them to manage. However, pupils have only got one chance to go through school. And that's what we have to keep an eye on. Is that what difference is it making this for learners? Are they leaving as happy, healthy individuals who can have an appropriate career and life experience? So all of the programs we've got in place are targeted at that. There is a need to evaluate programs and the impact, and that's difficult, particularly in the context of a changing curriculum and a changing assessment programme. We're all trying to find out what's right in this new context. There's a degree of experimentation, and those networks are established in order that head teachers are not having to do it on their own, that actually there's a professional network around them to share practice and to share learning. But it is a legitimate question, and I think that's a real challenge that we're all trying to deal with. Attendance rates we know are too low, so we're putting additional pressure on schools and expecting systems to raise the rate of attendance as well as learner outcomes, because it's the right thing to do. So I haven't got a quick answer, but it's really different. Sort of just something you want to.
You've touched on a passion of mine, well-being, and I've been privileged to travel quite a lot and talk about well-being, and I think this is about. For me, schools quite often get well-being wrong because they think it's about putting chocolates on a staff room table and you've kind of met the needs of staff. And I get that to a point. But well-being is about ensuring that people have access to good professional learning. It's about making sure that people have access to that support network when they need it. It's about making sure that people have access to the resources that they need to be able to do their jobs effectively. And I see that very much as our part within that jigsaw as well. So the professional learning we've touched upon. And Andrew's right, we're always assessing that professional learning. And we're currently going through our business planning season, where we're looking at what networks do we take out, because, you know, the engagement's low, or the head teachers are telling us this is just a waste of time. What can we condense? What can we refine and make that better? And we're going through that process at this moment. In terms of how we help head teachers' well-being, we've put in well-being checks for our head teachers, you know, and they're not superficial, tick a box. We really want that head teacher to build that relationship with their SIP, that they can phone them and have those rants from time to time that, you know, you don't want anything to do, anything to come from them. I've said about the working alongside model, so it's not on top of what you should be doing. You know, we're going to come and complement what you're doing there. So it's not an additional burden to that school. In terms of your question about, you know, how do head teachers manage being SIPs as well, which is a really good question. To become a SIP, it's a voluntary process, and we're currently going through this expression of interest from head teachers to become SIPs. We then provide the school with a financial back payment, which releases that head teacher for a set amount of time. So if a head teacher comes forward and wants to become a SIP for one school, we will pay that school where the head teacher works 6 days worth of release time to allow that head teacher to not be the head teacher on those days. So they're not doubling down on their workload. Now, I'm realistic enough to know I've just come out of headship myself, and I was a SIP. Sometimes it's not as straightforward as that. I get that. So the questions that we're asking our head teachers is, do you have that capacity within your school setup to allow this to happen? And it draws back to the last question about developing leadership as well, doesn't it? We also pay 2 additional days on top there for professional learning for SIPs as well. And when we've done our calculations, we don't tend to get anywhere near those 8 days, because we appreciate that there's a lot of things that the head teachers need to do beyond the structured posters and activities that we've outlined. We constantly talk to our SIP workforce. You know, when we have SIP briefings, we take soundings from them to see how it's going. And one of the positive things that's come forward this year is the SIP poster, which outlines the kind of key tasks for every term. And that's really set the direction of travel and the expectations for SIPs and head teachers, which, as a result, has helped to manage that workload.
Thanks very much.
Just to say on top of that, Chair, when I meet with the SIPs, when they have their one-to-one catch-ups, agenda item number 1 is about their well-being, how they're feeling, how their work programme is going. You know, do they feel that they are in control of everything? Are things getting a little bit too difficult, too tricky for them? You know, and we will talk around that as well, and maybe we can talk around strategies. We sometimes talk about maybe the need to step back a little bit, maybe to consider the number of schools that they've got, and whether actually, because circumstances change in schools quite dramatically from term to term, and something can just come out of left field that you're not expecting, you know, and it doesn't alter the effectiveness of leadership, but it can alter your ability to do your job in the way that you would normally do so. So, you know, the termly catch-ups are vital for us to get a handle on, is everything okay in your workplace to allow you to be released to do this job? And if it isn't, you know, we have that flexibility to say, okay, well, let's take some of that off you for a moment. You get back to where you need to be, you let us know, and then, you know, we can pick you back up again. So I think, again, it's those relationships and making sure that our SIPs know that they can come and talk to me and tell me if things are getting difficult and tricky, and then I will do whatever I can to help and support. Might be a little bit of paperwork I can take off them, might be a visit that I can take off them, just to help them, I suppose, manage what they're doing.
Is there a high turnover with SIPs?
No, I would say there's not a high turnover of SIPs, but what I would say is when we reach difficult periods, so again, coming out of COVID, for example, some head teachers had that ongoing staff absence, that ongoing pupil, low numbers. So I suppose their capacity at that point was a little bit compromised. I'd say now that's not the case. Pretty much all of our SIPs are effectively managing their workloads. But, we're mindful things can change at any point for any one of us.
And governing bodies should be aware of work-life balance as well. So, Andy, you want to come in?
Thanks, Chair. Just really to go back to the professional learning elements in particular and jump a layer up, as it were, so beyond the local authority level, EAS level. Back in probably 2018, around about the time Curriculum for Wales was introduced, the Welsh Government introduced at the same time their national mission, which had 4 enabling objectives, and the first enabling objective was an entitlement for professional learning for all staff in schools. So I think there's, and we're still very much in that sphere of ensuring that we're delivering on Objective 1 around professional learning, because that's the thing that's going to make the difference for Curriculum for Wales, for ALN, and for everything else. So on top of that, Welsh Government have allocated an additional inset day again this year and have committed to that for the next 3 years. It's a small gesture in many ways, but I think it's an important gesture, and we need to recognise that is dedicated for professional learning for schools and staff. Thank you.
Thank you. You'll be pleased to know we're on our last questions. No, sorry. Oh, Councillor Thomas, sorry.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. 1.27 in the PIAP action plan. Just could we have an update on the attendance, please, the progress there? And the other one is about the staff absences there. Yeah, 1.36 and 1.37. Just wonder what the progress we're making on those 2 items as well, please. Thank you, Chair.
Shall I come in on attendance first then? Yeah.
Please.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So a couple of bits that have moved on since then. So in terms of actual attendance figures, if you look at Welsh Government website, they did take a further dip across the whole of Wales. During the period of November and December, we've come out of that dip and we're slowly starting to see improvements again in schools. Primary schools are performing better in terms of attendance than secondary schools, and the further up you go in terms of secondary school, attendance seems to drop off again in around. Not much of a gender difference, interestingly. Traditionally, it's been more, perhaps boys' attendance has been lower, but it's fairly even. In terms of what we're doing at the moment, the strategy, as you Councillor Clark up there, the strategy has been agreed and signed off by Councillor Clark. It's actually going out. It's been out in schools for a little while in terms of a soft launch because we didn't need to wait. We just needed to get the activity happening in the schools. But we're going to be making a bit of an announcement, press release, hopefully next week in discussion with comms around that. That's really positive. Obviously, FPNs as part of that, the county notices, they've been introduced, and where governing bodies have felt appropriate, they've adopted them. Some interesting intelligence that has come through more recently where schools have used the advisory notice linked to fixed penalty notices. So that's the pre-warning notice almost. You're in danger of getting a letter. We've seen that being used really effectively and having quite an instant impact actually in terms of changing behaviours in communities. We suspected that would be the case. We've seen similar patterns in other local authorities where they've been using advisory notices. So really pleased about that. A couple of other commitments around developing attendance and that shared understanding. So we really wanted to push the cluster working around attendance and get clusters to develop their own cluster-wide attendance policies. So we've got 2 clusters currently who are looking at trying to develop, who are actively in the process of writing and developing their cluster policies. I think that's going to be good from a parent's point of view in terms of understanding what's going on in that space. Perhaps 2 other bits, because I think I could rattle on, but 2 big bits that have been done around that. So we've introduced a school attendance forum, so that's going to be meeting in 2 weeks' time for the first time. So that's an invitation to all schools, primary and secondary specials and the PRU, to come together, attendance leads to come together and just talk about what they're doing in schools. When we talk about the idea of networking and sharing ideas is probably the most powerful way of moving things forward there. So there's that activity going on. And the EWO, or the EWS, the Education Welfare Service, 2 bits of work they've done, obviously sharing and working with schools, but we've also intensified support for schools where there is a greater need. which has been really quite powerful in developing roles and responsibilities at a school level. And they've also done a lot of training more recently with schools around how to use use SIMS effectively. So that's the methodology for looking at how to use that effectively to look for trends, look for things that are going on in school, to look for early identifiers of pupils who may be at risk of becoming persistently absent. So there's been a lot of activity. That's a whistle-stop tour through it. The unfortunate bit has been, whilst we've seen a further decline nationally in attendance, it is starting to climb again now, and Torbine's in the same boat as that. So there's a long piece of work there, I think. Sorry, I've been...
So are we starting to see some sort of green shoots with the attendance figures?
It's improved from where it was in November and December, absolutely, which is really promising, and persistent absenteeism has improved as well. But there's a long way to go. It's not where we want it yet.
Yeah, I was just thinking it's still too variable and it's too low. Yeah. Which is a national picture, but it's a significant concern.
It was always year 9 was a problem. And when we start monitoring if they're going into class, that's another issue. They might come and register, but they might go off down the shops after. Yeah.
In terms of the staffing, so it's only since late February that we've had a full team in education. There were staff absences due to people waiting to take a post or illness. So it has only been, I think, 2 or 3 weeks since we've all actually been in full time. So it has impacted, but we're really clear. We're monitoring this. We know these are priority actions within the PIAP that we must address. Yeah.
I'm sure this committee will want to report at a later date as well. So now we're on the final question. No problem. Okay. Right. There are many actions, programmes set out in the body of the report and the PIAP to address the recommendations from ESTIN, but ultimately, and most importantly, will these actions have a tangible, demonstrable impact on our children's educational outcomes? Are we being suitably ambitious in our approach to achieve improvements in our schools and improve outcomes for our learners? The big question.
I'm really satisfied we're doing the right things, where I've said a few times, we've baselined over the autumn, and I'm really comfortable that we have a much more accurate picture of how we're performing as a local authority and where the schools are at and what their needs are. We're putting in the right support based on my professional experience, and I presume others. We now need to see the impact. And that's the point of this really comprehensive network of monitoring, because we can't leave it too long. We know that. That's why the schools are our highest priority, where we're monitoring each half term, which, going back to a wellbeing issue, does put additional pressure on the school, because we're asking them to report as well as make change. But we know that we have to do that, because if we're not tracking, and if the support and the challenge isn't right, it's having the impact on learners, and we need to adjust it as a priority. We have the range of measures that we're using to assess where schools are at, which we're tracking on a half-termly basis. That's new. We're refining the process around it. It's enabling officers to have a much better understanding of schools. There are problems which are going to take a long time to change. We've talked about attendance. That's a massive cultural change that's required. I can't offer any more assurance than that. Just that we're tracking it. There's a network of monitoring, and that we've got good engagement with schools, that they're working with us. And I feel we're in the best position that we've been for a long time. I don't know if...
Just to add to that, I think Andrew's right in what he says. You know, there's a range of experience here from working in other areas, other local authorities in Welsh Government, wherever it might be. I think that's one of the things that we've been really keen to do, is not just look internally at what we can do, but actually go out there and look at authorities, regions, policy, international, whatever it might be, where things have worked effectively in a kind of similar context, and try to bring those ideas and thinking here. appropriately. I'm not going to say we've just lifted things and dumped them in and said, well, it's going to work here. It's been about what is the context of Torfaen, what are the differences compared to maybe some of the processes that happen in other local authorities, be it size, demographic, whatever, and then how can we use some of that thinking and those ideas here? And if it's, that idea of looking out as well as looking in has been really, really important to our thinking.
Any supplementary questions from anyone? No? That leads me to thank Andrew, Andy, Jason, sorry.
I'm sorry, Chair, not related to the last question, but I think it'd be remiss of me or remiss of us as well not to reference the county plan. And within the county plan, the first wellbeing objective there relates to improving education for children and adults across the local authority. I think that reference within the county plan is really significant because it shows, I think, that corporate approach and that corporate response to tackling some of the issues we've experienced within education. So there's that complete corporate response there that's really outlined, not just within the first objective, the first wellbeing objective, and the second even, but right the way is peppered right the way throughout the county plan. And in some ways, the word golden thread or the term golden thread is used an awful lot, but you can see there's a golden thread of education throughout that county plan. So I think it's worth mentioning that, and obviously within that county plan there's that significant corporate buy-in and a significant political buy-in as well. So I think that just shows gives it that the work that's being done within education, that extra level of credibility as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Jason. Right, that brings us to the end of our questions. Can I take this opportunity to thank Andrew, Andy, Jonathan, Karen and Jason for their contribution to the meeting. Excellent answers, and thank you very much for your attendance. We'll now allow you to leave because we've got to deliberate on our recommendations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, members.
Thank you very much, members. We've been asked to assess whether the local authority has appropriate arrangements in place to address the Estin recommendations and to make comments and recommendations to the executive member where appropriate. So do we have any specific recommendations that they would like to make on the report? Janet.
Thank you, Chair. I was concerned, as was Councillor Collett Thomas, about the absenteeism, and can we have regular updates on that, because it doesn't seem to be getting better, and although schools are implementing the fine system, it is a great concern.
If I can just come in there quickly, Chair. Obviously, I'll note that within the comments, but as a committee, that's within your gift to request any updates. And I believe you've looked at attendance as part of one of the recommendations. Yeah. So obviously, in the summer now, when you do your visioning, you'll also have a session where you'll look back at recommendations you made in previous committees, and you will receive updates on those. So you will receive further information on how your recommendations have progressed from that particular meeting that you undertook. Okay?
Right. Shall we go around the table? Any recommendations? Lucy?
I wonder if we one recommendation could be that we have kind of continuing monitoring of how the clusters are working effectively and how the whole transitioning programme is working, to have a little, acknowledging it's still quite a new process, but I think that's quite an important area to have a handle on, because transitioning is such a vulnerable time. So maybe make a recommendation that there's continual sort of feedback about how that works, or how it's progressing.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. I did note that down, that was raised. Councillor Seaborn, you raised it, and whether that's a priority, because they said with the introduction of curriculum for Wales and the removal of Key Stage 3 data, it's very difficult now, so a priority for support for head teachers as well, that they are getting an understanding of the children that are moving on from their primary school cluster schools.
Sorry to... this is a slightly different recommendation, and I'm not quite sure if it even should be perhaps our next visioning thing, but we're very aware of the fact that with the introduction of the new curriculum and the lessening of need for statutory information, benchmarking things has become much more difficult, as they've said. So, again, I think it's about monitoring, and I guess that will affect consistency. So, how to monitor the impact of the change in the curriculum and the change in data information. It's a bit vague, maybe, but do you know what I'm getting at?
Yeah. Can I just say, at the briefing, I did send, I think Leanne sent the briefing note around to all the committee about the meeting I had with Welsh Government, where they're reverting back to 2019 monitoring until 2025. So we're reverting back to pre-COVID monitoring, and they're introducing a new system for 2025. So it might be that a recommendation to actually advise us how 2019 is being introduced.
I must have missed that, sorry.
Yeah, I did send a note around. I'll send it around again.
I'm sure you did.
Yeah, it is available. So. Okay. Anybody else with any recommendations, or should we ask Bex to go through what she's picked up? Okay. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Chair. So I've noted that one, Councillor Williams, that you just raised with regards to the cluster and the transition work. I didn't know if you wanted to make a particular recommendation around this CSSR work. Now, it was mentioned that they do discuss that within their head teacher meetings to try and promote and encourage other schools to take part. And it has been fairly newly introduced. It was a pilot last year. So I didn't know whether you wanted to make some sort of recommendation that perhaps the EAS could develop some sort of impact case studies that they could then give to other head teachers that would show them the tangible impacts that those sessions are having within schools. Yeah. Also, there was the point, Councillor Seaborn, you raised some questions on the governors and the involvement they have in developing their self-evaluations. And Andrew did mention that it would be good to raise that as part of the SDP meetings to ask them the involvement that the governors are having within the development of each school's self-evaluation process. Then there was also a point around pupil voice engagement and whether they could look to how they can engage pupil voice more in local authority decision-making and policy development. I think Andy did mention that that was a key area, and you raised that as a key point about community involvement within the wider school. Matt, I think that's all I had.
I think we may need a recommendation about, because it's up to the schools to make sure that once they've employed a member of staff, that they do their CPD. How can we monitor that our schools are taking that opportunity and promoting CPD within their schools? You know, if they're going to come in as a newly qualified teacher and remain as a newly qualified teacher, even though their time is lapsed, and they don't take up any other opportunities, how can we appoint them as middle management? So it's about a progression of leadership, I suppose, and I think we picked up on that in the questions. But it's how we actually have that information, that we know that it's happening and we know that it's being, otherwise we're paying out money for the EAS training, nobody's taking it up, and it's a waste of complete resources. So I think if we can pick up on that, that might be useful. Anybody, Alfie or Liam, do you have any recommendations that you'd like to bring forward?
Nothing from me,
No. Are you happy with the ones that we've just read out?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Anybody else? No, that's lovely then. We'll take those on as recommendations. The work programme is our agenda item 6. Can I invite Becky to go through that report for us, please? and confirm if we have any questions whether we are happy to proceed with the next. I can't remember what the next. Oh, it's the EAS business plan. Yes, we should have taken that today. Good job, we didn't.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the report on, for you to consider what item you'll take at your next meeting. As the Chair's just mentioned, you were due to also take the EAS business plan today. That was delayed slightly, so I believe a date has been put forward now, the 30th of March, Karen, has that been confirmed? We're working towards a date, so we'll get that to you as soon as possible.
Special meeting coming, isn't it? We're going to hold a special meeting.
So that'll be a special. In terms of your next scheduled meeting, as you can see there, you've got your basket of items in Appendix 1. You also will have set out exec forward programme, and you can see there that there are, as it stands, no decisions currently scheduled to be made in terms of relevance for this committee. And then there's the audit referrals, and I believe this you've considered the last of the recommendations that were put forward from the Aston inspection. So the item that was in your basket of items for the next meeting is the 21st Century Schools programme. So, members, are you still satisfied that that is the item that you take to your next schedule?
I think it's about time. Well, new members haven't had an update on 21st century, I don't think. And it would be good to know where we are with that.
Thank you, Chair. So Leanne will work with you on that pro forma for that report. Thank you.
Leanne will arrange a date to be sent out for the special meeting in March. And then I haven't got the date on here for the next
4th of May.
4th of May is our next usual committee. Can I thank Bex for taking the chair in place of Leanne, and Leanne Paul is in duty service, not happy, I don't think. But she has contributed to the meeting by supplying all the details and things. So thanks, Geraint. And now I'd like to close the meeting. Thank you very much. Thanks for your